Hello, everyone. We're just getting everything set up here. I want to make sure that things are working properly as we start today's live event. Just give me 1 second. Excellent. Well, welcome, everyone. Welcome to Seeing the Unseen, Birds of Alaska's Arctic. This is a special live event produced by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and it's made possible by our supporters and donors. And we're really excited to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us. So before we dive in, let's get to know each other. If you're like chatting, finger chatting, we'd love to hear from you in the chat on YouTube. Let us know where you're joining from. Let us know sort of what part of the world or the states you might be in. And if you want, you can let us know what your favorite bird is or whether or not you participated in Big Day. Just let us know a little bit of who's out there watching. My name is Charles Eldermeyer. I'm a live producer here at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And over the next hour or so, you'll have a front row seat that will take you on a two-part journey across Alaska. We'll begin by talking with two members of Team Sapsucker to hear a little bit about their just completed epic big day in the south of Alaska. And then we'll dive deep into the far north with lab cinematographer Gerrit Vyn to shine a spotlight on the extraordinary efforts underway to explore the raptors of the Colville River. Wow, it looks like we have a lot of people tuning in. I'm just looking over at the chat right now. You might see me looking off screen every once in a while. That's because I have your chat over here so I can keep an eye on it. Um, Welcome, everybody, again. You're welcome to share your thoughts and questions in the chat, which my colleague Natalie Sloan will be monitoring, along with Jill Leichter from Team Sapsucker. And we should have a few minutes at the end to try and answer a few questions on screen, including from the many that were submitted by those of you who registered ahead of time. So thank you for that. Don't fret if you need to jump off early. Anyone who registered for the event will get a follow-up email with a link to the recording, as well as other materials related to this event. Natalie has pinned a chat at the top. If you look at the top of your chat, she's pinned a message at the top with a link to register if you want to make sure we can send you that recording. So, what is Big Day? A good starting point for everybody, if you're new to the idea, is to get a better sense of what we mean by what we're talking about when we say this year's Big Day. And it's a special thing when we're talking about the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Each year, we assemble a team known as Team Sapsucker from across the lab to participate in a 24-hour big day, a birding marathon to raise money for conservation efforts. The location changes each year, and we highlight conservation stories and opportunities with each new place. And this event helps raise funds for the lab's science, conservation, and outreach work. This year, Team Sapsucker traveled to the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska and consisted of two groups. For the first year ever, one group took on the challenge of what is called a big sit, where they recorded all the birds that they could identify from one single location. Another group took to the roads and trails and even to the ocean itself of the surrounding area, scouring different habitats to discover more birds from across the peninsula. So I'd love to welcome those two members of Team Sapsucker. If you guys could walk on stage. Um, I'm excited to be joined by two members of Team Sapsucker, each of whom work at the Cornell Lab. Please join me in welcoming Holly Grant, the Nest Watch project assistant and representative from the Big Sit effort. Hi, Holly.
Hello.
And Wenfei Tong, science editor for Conservation Media, who will share about the traveling efforts. Hi, Wenfei.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, give me 1 second. I'm going to start sharing some slides here. And Zoom always hides things. So let's see. We are here. Okay, can everybody see this screen? You guys see it over there? Awesome. So one thing that's important to note that I want to kick it off with is you guys are only part of Team Sapsucker. It's more than just the two of you, right? So I don't know if you'd want to tell us a little bit about the team and its experience birding in Alaska. Holly, do you want to start that off and then we'll kick it over to Wenfei?
Yeah, so our team was myself, Noah, Jill, and Xavier, and we were on the Big Sit team. And it was our first time, I think for all of us, it was our first time in Alaska. So we were just wowed by everything, even just coming in on the plane landing, you could see all the mountains underneath us, and we were just wowed just the whole way. That beautiful drive from Anchorage down to Homer was really incredible for all of us.
I think there's not a 4 hour stretch of Alaska that goes by faster because of the scenery. You guys got to see some incredible spots. How about
Right.
you, Wenfei? What anything that you reflect on that first
So,
first landing or others?
I mean, it was just a terrific opportunity to both experience Alaska again. I used to live in Anchorage, and Gerrit, as you know, another team member of the traveling team Sapsucker, has spent a lot of time. We were talking about this, and Gerrit said, "Oh, I've probably spent about a year cumulatively in Anchorage on my way further north." And we also had on our team Taylor Long, who is a really key contributor to the eBird team. So he was our expert in terms of setting up all the trip lists in which both teams had to enter all their birds. And Nati Garcia, who is a scientist visiting us from Argentina, who really knows polar birds in the South Pole area, not so much the Arctic. So it was a really nice mix of people who are returning to old bird and human friends and people who were going wow at the scenery. And I have to say, even being back after living there, I was saying wow every minute almost from the car. It's really beautiful, all while
That's
walking through the forests.
I am definitely jealous. I'm picturing it right now in my head, and the pictures on screen kind of do it a ton of that justice. The mountains, the people on the team, and you mentioned this, Wenfei, that you were there before, but you weren't necessarily there before to do a big day. And for most of your team members, nobody was actually a strict birding hotshot expert from Alaska, right? And so, given that everybody was coming from so far away, how did you guys approach finding birds for this big day effort? what what sort of, it's so big. Like, how do you even get around that idea of like where are the birds even going to be? There's so much to cover.
I mean, one thing we should do is thank everyone who was so helpful in supporting us, both outside the lab as well as members of the lab, previous members of Team Sapsucker. But in the previous slide, you can see both teams meeting with locals of Homer or people who are visiting the Kachumak Bay Shorebird Festival, I think, in the right. But in the central slide, there's this wonderful a new friend we've made named Kathy Eagle, who lives in Homer and whom I coincidentally met while walking my dog in Ithaca.
Huh,
And she was visiting her son, who was doing his PhD in Cornell. You know, it's just like small world, right? And I was pointing out a black-capped chickadee to her in Ithaca. And next thing I knew, she was sending me all these lists of people to contact in Homer and in Seward to help us prepare for the big day planning.
that's
And
great.
really, we couldn't have done it without people like Kathy or other members of the local Audubon group. And I know Gerrit had a lot of contacts too. We definitely used eBird a lot as well.
So eBird was an important part of it, but those local connections, it sounds
Yeah,
like, were really
invaluable.
invaluable. Holly, anything to add to that from the Big Sit team's perspective?
We had kind of a similar experience. We used eBird really to kind of hone down like which locations we wanted to scout, excuse me, before Big Day. But as we were at those scouting locations, we would meet with local people attending the festival or, just other people that we happened to run into just looking for birds at some of these scouting locations. And we said, you live here. If you were going to be sitting in one spot to see as many birds as possible today, where would you go? And we got some really great suggestions from them that we ended up checking out. And I think through advice from locals and through our experience, we ended up at the location we did just from all of that kind of coming together.
That must have been amazing to have everybody kind of pitching in on that end to try and help make the day successful. And it really speaks to this broad experience. Everybody gets so excited about birds, and I know, you guys have probably had this experience out there in the audience. Somebody comes over to your house, maybe you have a cool bird feeder or a cool bird visiting your yard, and you really want them to get on it because it's like such a special thing. So kudos to the people of the Kenai Peninsula for sharing all that great community and their birds as well. Um, I kind of like this slide only because I think there's another aspect to where we are. A lot of times when people think of Alaska, you're thinking of this giant state, but there's a lot of water in that state. So on the left side of that slide, I know this isn't from the scouting time, but tell me, this is part of what had to happen, set up during scouting. What is going on over there, Wenfei?
This was an amazing trip. This is probably my favorite part of the entire 4 days we were there. Gerrit had this brilliant idea that we should make sure to get out on a boat and get some of the seabirds that way. which we wouldn't be able to see further inland or on the coast. And so there was this magical moment just before what you're seeing, which is when all these black-legged kittiwakes were taking off from their nests and wheeling around us and calling. And just before that, we were setting out for this little island called Gull Island, just off the coast of Homer. And you could really see the sun starting to rise on one side on the left and the moon starting to set on the right. And that was, and everything is bluey gray like you see in the photograph. It's just really magical to
That sounds
experience that.
amazing. That really sounds amazing, Wenfei. And Holly, I imagine that for the Big Sit team, scouting took on a different kind of a challenge, right?
Yeah, we had a bit of a challenge because we only had about a day to go to about 5 different locations and then a sixth one that we were recommended. And so kind of, we were trying to schedule where we wanted to go with the way the tides were operating too. So weren't always able to visit the same place at multiple different tidal periods. Because the types of birds that come in will be different at different tidal periods. So yeah, it was a little bit different, but it did give us a little bit of time. We were all in the Homer area, so we did have some time to, break for lunch, and we didn't necessarily have to be, I'm not sure if this happened for you guys, Wenfei, but, traveling for so many different locations, you probably were kind of on a tight schedule. And that probably made it harder to stop for breaks here and there.
I mean, you should have seen our plan by the time we came to the big day. It was, down to 3 minutes of commuting from one location to another and 7 minutes to see the birds we needed to see at that location. And yes, factoring in the tides was a big one. And also being in the right places to hear the birds that would be singing before they stopped singing.
So
Um,
so yeah,
yeah.
the numbers actually became an important part of the day. And as we said, like a big day or a big sit is in part about counting all those species you might encounter. So a little bit of a drum roll in the audience. Let's take a look at what the day actually had for the two teams, what you were able to track down on the day. And I like this slide because uh, there are similar things here. Hours birding, that's a lot of time to spend birding, 17 hours, 22 hours, right? Even seeing 46 species in a day for a lot of people is just an incredible day. And the fact that the traveling team more than doubled that gives a sense of the birds that are out there, right? But tell me about that first bird that you guys saw to kick off the day. I can imagine there's a little bit of anxiety or at least excitement. Um, Holly, what were you guys thinking and seeing and feeling when you saw that sandhill crane to start things out?
I think we were all really excited. It's this great bird that all of us, have seen before, but didn't really see him. I don't think any of us are used to seeing them in these numbers. I think there's about, I don't remember if it was 14 or 20 that we reported on that first list, but a decent number of them in the slough that we were perched next to. And we'd heard a Wilson snipe as we were packing the car, but because we're at the big sit, we can only count the birds we saw at that big sit location. So
Yeah.
to have a really cool bird be that first bird instead of the ring-necked pheasant that had been, kind of skulking around that area the previous day, which is, a lovely bird. It's just an introduced species. So having, a native species the area is known for hosting was really special.
That's awesome. And then I like this biggest surprise, what to our audience and what is a Godwit trifecta and what made it such a big surprise?
Yeah, I mean, we were hoping to see at least two species of godwit, probably, hopefully all three. But what was so unusual about this particular sighting is we had a huge flock of bar-tailed godwits with quite a few Hudsonian and marbled godwits in the mix as well. And bar-tailed godwits is, I think Gerrit might have shown in some of his previous work, if not in this one, uh, really famous for making a very, very long distance, non-stop flight all the way from South America. So it was just wonderful to see so many of them when we weren't expecting them there in those numbers at that time of year. And also a funny note is the previous president of the Alaska Audubon, Stan Senner, whose son was a Godwit biologist, was giving a very important talk at the Kachemak Bay Shorebird Festival at the same time. So we felt suddenly like we were alone or relatively alone making this amazing discovery of
Wow.
the
That's
three species of godwits, and all the other birders who had been thronging the Homer Spit for 2 days were absent because they were all listening to this talk. So there was that excitement of the surprise and the discovery all at the same time, which
That's
was really
great. That's really, really exciting. And I'm going to move on to the next slide here because, like, counting the birds, the numbers behind the day, the things you missed, which is what a dip is. If anybody didn't realize that, I meant to describe that on the last. Like, those are all part of any birding trip, right? But there's also just these magical moments between the counting, right? And so you guys found an American dipper nest, you know?
Yeah, that was such a lovely example of paying attention to the surroundings and sort of trying to use your experience and instincts. Gerrit had this idea that there might be a dipper nest on the side of the rock, and he was right. There was a dipper nest. So we saw the dipper first, but this was an attempt of ours on scouting day to make sure we knew certain locations where the birds would almost certainly, like almost with 100% certainty, show up.
Yeah,
And we
I mean,
didn't
that's
end up coming back here because it was a bit too far north, and we found another better dipper spot without a nest, but the dipper showed up in the nick
that's
of time.
And it's
It
just a
was-
part, it's one
Yeah,
thing to see a dipper, it's another thing to see, this
yeah,
incredible creation, right?
and it's such
Um,
a pretty little ball of lichens, and yeah,
yeah,
really special.
it looks like something very magical. And I know for you, Holly, there was actually a magical bird as well. This being a bar-tailed godwit, your 500th bird. And what was it like sharing that experience with the other people on this trip?
It was wonderful. We were sitting there. We just finished scouting Mariner Park, which is on one side of the spit, and directly on the other side, we saw all these cars lined up to look at this huge shorebird flock that had just shown up at the low tide. Um, and then we'd seen this flock of godwits fly in, and we're all looking at them. We're like, these are pretty pale. They're not reddish like a Hudsonian godwit would be. We didn't think, bar-tailed godwits. We hadn't seen any of them yet. And so Jill and I went to go get a closer look, and then we got some confirmation. We got a closer look at where they had landed a little bit farther away.
Oh,
And
sorry.
then one of the a really special moment was that someone who was attending the festival was just down the beach from us, and she heard us kind of, get all excited and my little squeal of delight. And she came over and said, "Oh, that was just so wonderful to hear. I'm so excited. I got to kind of share that with you or hear your excitement." So, and then we ended up connecting with her later as well, and she was one of the people who helped us find some new places to scout. So,
That's great.
it was wonderful. It was a really, really wonderful 500th bird.
And that's another shout to going birding with friends or with a group of people. You get to share those sorts of fun milestones or cool discoveries like the Dipper Nest. I
Right.
also wanted to point out that you guys were amazing artists as well, and somehow between the finding birds and the observing fun things and celebrating, you found time to be inspired and create art. This picture on the left, this drawing on the left is painting, sorry, is by Wenfei of some sea otters and pups. And in the center, sandhill cranes that Holly made. And these are just a sample, just one piece of the different things that you guys wound up being inspired to make. And I just wondered, like, to you, like, was this, where did this come from? Is this, were you walking into this knowing this might be an outcome, or were you just like overtaken?
I mean, I typically try to bring something to draw with and paint with, partly because I don't have a huge camera and lens, and I don't always want to spend my time with the bird trying to get a good photo of it or a subpar photo of it. So I try to store up the memory. I also think it's just so important to enjoy everything about the experience, not just, counting up the birds. So in this case, we had one magical afternoon evening of looking through a spotting scope out of our room where there was this fantastic view of the bay, and you could see these sea otters with their pups and these harbor seals and lots of bald eagles. It was just and very beautiful with the mountains in the background.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was also an attempt to make a Mother's Day card, so
Ah,
myself in a way and my friends, because I wasn't going to be spending Mother's Day with my son. And one of my friends said, "Oh, she hopes that she her daughter feels just like one of these baby sea otters when
Oh, that's sweet.
so that was yeah, just another way of connecting with birds is just to watch their behavior and
And
um
and Holly, I can't help but notice with the sandhill crane is also the that first species of the day. Was this made that day or prior?
Yeah, this was made at our Big Sit site. I have an iPad and a digital art program that I use to sketch things. And usually when I'm out on a trip on any kind of vacation, I like to do sort of a little nature journal to record kind of my experiences and just kind of have that extra bit of like memory of the trip, right? So when you get home, you kind of have this little log of everything you've done and like this moments that really stood out. And so I knew that that day I wanted to kind of, if there was some special moments like that, I would be recording them. And this moment where we saw the cranes singing, making their weird sound that they do. And it
Trumpeting.
was just cold enough that you could see their breath. And I was like, that's really cool. That's something that I need to get down on paper.
That is totally cool. And I was really excited to see these as they came across social media when the lab was sharing them. I was like, that is just a great end to the day. Um, And it's a great reminder that watching birds and being out in nature can really take all sorts of different forms. And, I think all of us here, including obviously Winfei and Holly, we hope that this year's Big Day team has inspired you out there in the audience to maybe take a moment to enjoy the birds in all the ways that suit you best, whether it's art, sitting, traveling abroad, traveling to your own backyard, traveling to a local park. Um, and so, with that, I would like to say that, gosh, it sounds like it not only was it a very just fulfilling and incredible experience for you two, but it was also a successful big day as well. Would you agree?
yeah, thank
Absolutely.
you so much.
That's awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your reflections and observations from the day. I can honestly say it made me feel like I was there and I want to be there sometime soon. And to the audience, Holly and Winfrey are going to come back at the end and hopefully have some time for questions. So thank you, Holly and Winfrey. I'm going to stop my screen share here in a moment. And I want to say thanks to everybody out there in the audience who made a big day donation. We are so grateful to the generosity of the community out there. Your support actually helps us do these sorts of events. And with over $900,000 raised so far, we're approaching the $1 million mark for this fundraising event of the spring that the lab really tries to highlight. There's still time to donate to the big day effort if you want to support the lab's urgent work to help protect birds in Alaska and elsewhere. There's a QR code on the screen you can take a picture of, and Natalie's going to be pinning a link in the chat in case you want to use it there. And we'll probably follow up with you again. If you register, you'll probably get information about how you can help make a difference as well. So thank you again to Holly and Wenfei. I'm very inspired by them. And when I can't help but think about how much more of Alaska there is to explore. So let me stop my screen share because we don't need to be looking at that the entire time. Um, and really, one big day can't even begin to scratch the surface of everything there is to know and learn about the birds of Alaska. Focusing on one place like the Kenai Peninsula can raise the visibility of that region's biodiversity. And it's really a powerful reminder of that need for conservation. And a different way to inspire people involves taking a closer, more intensive look and trying to convey the importance and fragility of even the parts of Alaska that we can't see. So I'd like to invite Gerrit on screen. If you're out there, Gerrit, feel free to turn on your
Hey
mic.
there.
I'm really excited to introduce Gerrit. We're old time friends from, geez, I think it's decades now. He was also a member of the traveling portion of Team Sapsucker, and he's a media producer for the Center for Conservation Media. Welcome to the event, Gerrit.
Thanks, Charles. Glad to be here.
Um,
Go ahead.
sorry, I was going to
Uh,
say to everybody out there in the audience, many of you who registered for the event ahead of time were sent a link to a special sneak peek at Gerrit's new documentary about the Colville River, which is a film that enables you to accompany Gerrit on a spectacular voyage in search of a clearer look at the populations of raptors nesting on the cliffs above the Colville River. And today, the second part of this hour, we're going to be hearing from Gerrit about this incredible place and what it took to get this closer look. Thanks a lot for joining us, Gerrit. And before we dive into the Colville, is there anything you'd like to add about being a part of Team Sapsucker on Big Day?
yeah. It was great to hear that recap. For me, I started out birding as a young person and did some big days as a young person, but between then and now, I have not done a big day, and generally I have to turn off a bit of my birding radar when I'm actually out doing filming and photography work because you're so focused on the work and the species you're working with that it's hard to see everything. So it was really fun to be out there with some people that hadn't seen all these species or experienced Alaska before and see some of that excitement for some of the things that I've been lucky to experience and do up in Alaska over the years myself. So it's really great to be out there with them.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah,
thanks for adding those thoughts to the recap of Big Day. And if you're ready to share about the Colville, I think we're all ears. Thank you.
sure thing. I'm going to pull up my deck here and bear with me 1 second. You're seeing that?
Not yet.
Try that one more time.
There we go. Now, so I can see your desktop.
There we go.
And there you go. Yep. And I'm
Great.
out.
Great. So for a number of years now, I've been working with the lab to support a campaign to protect America's Arctic. And this is an area primarily north of the Brooks Range in Alaska, encompasses an area called the North Slope and the Arctic Coastal Plain. And we're trying to use visual media as a main driver of impact and showing people these places that most people have never seen before, and most of them have never been filmed before. And specifically, I've been focusing on the 23 million acre National Petroleum Reserve, which, despite its name, is the largest tract of pristine, undisturbed public land in the United States. And it's really the most valuable piece of wilderness in the USA when you consider both the wilderness values to humans and the wildlife values, and especially its massive productivity for Arctic migratory birds. So what I want to share with you right now is our latest effort to document one portion of the National Petroleum Reserve called the Colville River Special Area. And hopefully many of you have seen the film already. You'll see some redundant things here that I'm going to show you, but this will be more of a behind the scenes look of what it's like to go out and do this kind of work in the field to create a film like this. So first, to orient everybody, let's look at a couple of maps. This is generally the region of Alaska we're talking about, this northern third of Alaska, north of the Brooks Range. And within this area, if you look over to the right side of the screen here, you see the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And at the top of that, this area called the 1002 area. And that's an area that for many, many years, many of you have probably heard that's the contentious area where there have been attempts and repeated attempts and current attempts to drill within the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for oil. But if you look way over here to the other side of the screen, you see this much larger area, the National Petroleum Reserve-Alaska. And if you notice at the top of that, all these blue dots, that is the Arctic coastal plain, and that is the area of Alaska that is essential to nesting waterfowl, shorebirds, and bird life. And really, when it comes to birds, this area is vastly more important to bird life than the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Not to say the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge isn't important, but this area in the National Petroleum Reserve is really unprecedented in terms of productivity and the number of wetlands. So a closer look at this here. This area for the first time is now being encroached upon. Despite its name, like I said, it has not been developed. If you look there where the box just popped up, that is the area of what is called the Willow development that was approved by the previous administration. So already efforts are underway and roads are being built into the National Petroleum Reserve. It's the first major incursion into the NPRA. And there's a number of areas in the NPRA that have been recognized since the 1970s as special areas. And these are areas with important biological values, values to subsistence. And there's the Chesapeake Lake Special Area where we worked several years ago. Many of you may have heard about this in Living Bird magazine. And more recently, last year, we worked in the Colville River Special Area, and that's the area I'm going to talk about tonight. So the reason this Colville River Special Area was originally recognized and protected was the Arctic peregrine falcon. This area is known as a stronghold for peregrines, and at the height of DDT, even here, only 14 pairs of peregrines remained. There's now more than 60, and is protected as an area that was known to be a stronghold and a place they could potentially recover. So our mission was to go up there and basically put this place on the map visually. Very little to no visual documentation has been done in this region of Alaska. It's extremely remote, difficult to travel in, difficult logistics. So to mount an expedition like this, obviously there was a lot of planning involved, and this is one of our final days in Fairbanks, Alaska. Last look at the maps, really trying to figure out how we were going to get to where we wanted to go, where we wanted to start, and all that kind of stuff. So obviously there's a lot of gear involved in an expedition like this, and we had to use small planes to fly up, land on gravel bars along the river, and we used a raft to raft down the river to get to our filming locations. And so we had to shuttle a lot of gear, about 100 miles back and forth several times to finally end up here. And this is the starting point on the first day of our trip of working on the Colville River. And you can kind of see on the right side of this picture here, the tracks of where we landed the plane. So once we got everything set up, got everything fit in the boat, which was a bit of a Tetris game. It was June 25th, and we had about 3 weeks on the river and about 160 miles to travel. And like I said, our goal here was not only to document the landscape and the wilderness, but especially to document the raptors that nest on the cliffs along the Colville River, and especially the Arctic peregrine falcon. So I'm going to show you a little bit of video here of what this landscape looks like. The Colville River is the largest Arctic river in Alaska. It's the third largest Arctic river in the world. It starts in the mountains in the Brooks Range and runs for over 400 miles to the Arctic Ocean. And it winds its way through tundra and the foothills and has carved, these unique cliffs in an otherwise pretty smoothly rolling hill or flat environment, and that provides the nesting habitat for raptors. Otherwise, raptors really couldn't inhabit this really rich area for feeding without these cliffs. In addition to this tundra surrounding the Colville River, which provides waterfowl, shorebirds, different species that peregrines feed on, the river corridor itself also has these riparian thickets of willows, a lot of songbirds that also come from around the world, and that is also another major food source for peregrine falcons. And this is an example of a type of cliff the falcons would nest on, obviously very safe from terrestrial predators. And our job was basically to work our way down this river and locate nests to film. So we had a lot of things to work against us when trying to find nests to film. For one, we're working our way down basically a one-way street. So every time we decided a nest was not filmable or wasn't quite to our liking, or the birds were too shy to film, or we felt like it was too big of a disturbance, we had to make that hard decision whether to keep going down the river, knowing that we couldn't go back. But we basically employed two types of techniques when we did find nests that were filmable, preferably, at or near eye level if we could get to them. One was to use blinds like this. So we'd go up, set up our blinds. We had myself and another cameraman, and we'd basically film from these blinds for very long stints, sometimes 8, 12 hours we'd be in the blind. And the other technique we used, and this is permitted work through the Fish and Wildlife Service, was to use remote cameras. And basically, if we had a suitable nest, we'd do some climbing and set up cameras that we could operate remotely. So this is basically a typical day of hiking up to check a nest location. When we found nests that looked promising, we'd set up our camp on the river and begin the process of seeing how we could access the nest, observe the birds, and ultimately decide if it was a nest we could film. And obviously,
there's a few mosquitoes.
This time of year in Alaska, bugs are
just getting started.
A major obstacle to personal comfort. So in this case, we had a very experienced mountain guide with us who's a rescue climber on Denali who was helping us with our outfitting and rigging for climbing. And I'm going down here to take a look at one of the nests to see if it's a candidate for filming. It doesn't look very steep there, but I can tell you when you're hanging off the rope, it looks awfully steep. That's the Colville River there running down below. Well, I'm down here on the cliff, waiting for the female to come back to the nest. She's got 3 little chicks and a beautiful ledge crevice across from me. So that nest ended up not being one that we filmed. We tried to make very brief visits to these nests to triage them when we went up to them. And the first nest we actually had some really great success with was actually a rough-legged hawk nest. Rough-legged hawks build their own nests, unlike falcons, and we found this really beautiful nest on a low rock outcropping that had 4 newly hatched chicks. And many of you may be familiar with rough-legged hawks. This is a bird that winters across southern Canada and the northern third or half of the United States primarily. So many people do encounter these near home. But in the summer, they go up to these remote Arctic areas to raise their chicks in the next generation. And here's some bits from that effort to film the rough-legged hawk nest. And here's the female flying into the nest. And the female is really the main caretaker of the chicks. She spends most of her time at the nest waiting for the male to bring food. She's the one that primarily refurbishes the nest, interacts with the chicks, shelters the chicks, warms the chicks, and ultimately is the one who feeds the chicks. And here's the male flying in with some food. This is it's like a big plunder bowl he's brought to her. And she'll proceed to tear it up and feed the chicks. This was a really wonderful experience to have early on in the trip and propelled us onward to get our main quarry, the Peregrine Falcon. So turns out though, the next real prize was this white Gyrfalcon with 4 chicks in a nest that were right on the verge of fledging. And only about 10% of Gyrfalcons in this part of the world are white. And this was the moment really in real time where we first discovered this white Gyrfalcon and its nest. You can see these 4 chicks are fully feathered. They barely have any down on them. And we very quickly made our way up to a little rock outcrop and built some little platforms, got our blinds in place. And then we spent almost 24 hours in our blinds filming this nest. They're very noisy, spent a lot of time exercising their wings and also begging to be fed. And they spent a lot of time just teetering on the edge, staring off at the ground with thoughts of leaving that nest and what lie in store for them out in the world. So here the adult brought in a ptarmigan, which is a primary food source for Gyrfalcons, and high ptarmigan numbers this year were probably the reason they did so well, this pair. And instead of leaving the food, she actually flew off with it and left it below the nest on some rocks. And while we were kind of mesmerized watching the female down there perched and getting shots of her, one of the young Gyrfalcons actually jumped out of the nest and flew down and began eating this ptarmigan, which sent the other Gyrfalcon chicks into a frenzy, making a lot of noise, which I muted here. And the bird just continued to eat. First time out in the world. And once it was full, it was really focused again on all the noise up at the nest and tried to make its way back up there with these little jumping flights up the rocks. And the bird actually ended up right in front of our blinds, which is how we luckily were able to get those really close shots of its head and feet, which was a real gift as far as filmmaking is concerned. So after that, we were able to film several other really beautiful Gyrfalcon nests. It was a great year for Gyrfalcons. We found actually close to a dozen Gyrfalcon nests with chicks, but Peregrine Falcons continued to be really difficult. Here's a little montage showing a little bit of the experience of camp life and some of the other aspects of an expedition like this. Of course, on an expedition, there's a ton of loading and unloading of gear. Luckily, with a raft, you're able to carry a lot of stuff, so we were able to actually eat pretty well. We spent a lot of time doing chores like pumping and carrying water.
We can float around with the pack
And we
raft
spent a
and
lot of
scout it,
time
and
studying maps
if it's
and
we'll be able to paddle
strategizing
back
how to
with the
visit
pack
different
raft
cliffs
through that stuff,
and nests.
or hike back. Yeah, do it because there are nests all up there, but it's more on bluff.
We also had a little station set up for our footage review, charging batteries, downloading media, all that kind of stuff, which is kind of a big lift this far
Yeah,
in the
I'm
field.
keeping an eye on you.
And then we did a lot of obviously hiking and climbing to test, check nest sites. And one thing we weren't necessarily expecting was the weather extremes we experienced in this tour. We had really hot, sunny days with no shade.
It's been hot and sunny all day. Finally, a cloud came, so we go out and film and get in the boat. And within 2 minutes, deluge.
We had
rain.
heavy rains where we actually ended up with our tents in the river at one point, and then we actually had some snow as well. And then, of course, there's with all the unpacking, there is the packing again, and that consumed a lot of our time and energy, just the packing and unpacking. So the river corridor itself is also full of other animals, iconic animals like bears and wolves. Everywhere we camped, we had their tracks all around our campsites. They're very difficult to see in the thick willow riverine corridor that we were in, but we did manage to see a few wolves and some grizzly bears. Here's a grizzly bear that was peeking out of the willows, and seeing a bear like this in the willows just reminds you of how many bears there are actually in the willows that you don't see. So it keeps you on your toes wherever you go. And we were lucky to see some really wonderful groups of muskox on the gravel bars of the river. So we were very actually nervous by the end of the trip because we had not found a suitable nest of a peregrine falcon to film. But finally, on these river bluffs here, which is really the typical nesting kind of habitat that they like, these more bluffs with a sodden kind of tundra top to them. And we did find one amazing nest with this beautiful pair of Arctic peregrines. You can see here how much bigger the female is there on the left than this really starkly dark and light male, beautiful male. And this is a look at a scene from the film. But finally, we were able to find an absolutely stunning nest.
One to the right of that is where the male's been sitting.
We've just made about the 3-mile hike and climb. But finally, we were able to find an absolutely stunning nest.
One to the right of that is where the male's been sitting.
We've just made about the 3-mile hike and climb to finally get up here and do some filming, and we're in our last 48 hours, and for the first time in about a week, all of a sudden it's decided to start pouring rain, and it just looks like rain as far as you can see. So we will be sitting here as long as it takes and hopefully be able to move a blind in somewhere where we can start filming the birds. Finally, I've gotten the camera set up on the peregrine nest. There she is. It's a little brighter. So that was the real prize of our trip, to finally film this iconic bird. I was also able to get some beautiful still images that really was very exciting to get, that shows this bird, that represents this place within the context of the Colville River and its environment. These peregrines make the longest migrations of any peregrines. Some of these go all the way down to southern South America. And this is going to be a great addition to the visual materials that will help tell the story of this place and the importance of this place. And this is the very last day after we finally filmed this peregrine falcon nest. We were very excited, very exhausted, and definitely tired of the mosquitoes. It was overall, for me, one of the most difficult trips I've ever done physically. It's very hard work. But when you see these little baby peregrine falcons with the mosquito on their forehead, if they can take it, surely we can handle this challenging work assignment. And I feel, just even watching that footage right now, it's inspires me to see that bird and its chicks out in that wild environment in our country. And I'm very humbled and proud to represent the lab and our membership in doing this work. There's really no other organization that I know of willing to take the risks to invest the resources and energy into these extremely important stories and critical places to bird life that otherwise would receive little to no attention. So thank you. Yeah, with one of our core commitments at the lab being to protect the landscapes most important to bird life, this is a region that we just couldn't ignore. And like I've said, this area has never been documented like this. And through our partners, we hope we can help Americans understand all of the values of these lands and balance the conversation about how they're used. And right at this very moment, these lands are in the crosshairs and are extremely vulnerable and will be in the coming years. So I'm going to end here by showing the ending film sequence. For those of you who haven't seen the film, I invite you to watch it after the show, share it with your family and friends. And that'll be it for me. Very few people have the opportunity to come to someplace like this. But just knowing that beyond the farthest horizon, there are still wild places where creatures like bears and wolves and falcons roam, is something that, as Americans, we're so fortunate to have. And these special areas in the National Petroleum Reserve in America's Arctic, these are remarkable lands. They're irreplaceable, not only for these birds, but for our own spirits. They should always be protected. Thank you, everybody.
Wow, Gerrit, thank you so much for sharing your efforts with us. I've watched the film a few times since getting the link, and to see these bits and pieces from behind the scenes, what it took to go into it, is makes it just that much more amazing. It's a really powerful piece about this unique place that most of us can only hope to get to someday, and I feel just better informed and inspired. And it's really a great example of the kind of work that the lab is able to get involved with because of people like the people that are here watching today, the people that help support these kinds of efforts that are not easy. They're not AI generated. They're not all rose-colored glasses. And so I just want to appreciate you for spending that time to both create it and to spend some time today sharing with us. So we've got about 6 to 8 minutes left. And I'd love to sort of like deal with a couple of questions that have come up a bunch of times. And I'm going to aim one at Team Sapsucker here that actually, to me, is also related to just all the work that went into making an expedition like the one you just went on, Gerrit, happen. And for Team Sapsucker, all three of you are Team Sapsucker. A lot of people reached out and wondered how to go about planning to see birds somewhere. Like what's the best use of times? What kind of tools might be used, and what should they keep in mind? And this could be traveling somewhere far away, like the Colville, but it could be their own backyard. And I wondered if you guys wanted to share a little bit more for a couple of minutes about what went into your big day. And Gerrit, if there's anything else that you think would be relevant to the Colville piece.
Mm-hmm. Sure, I'll just throw in real quick. Obviously, eBird is a tremendous resource these days for people to learn about where birds have been seen and how to find birds, but also just to infer from eBird what type of habitat birds use and where they're likely to be seen, if not going to the exact place they've been seen. We were reminded on the big day, we talked about this a bit, that we saw a dozen species that had not even been reported in the state of Alaska yet on eBird on our big day. And it went back to being the mindset of the pre-eBird days, where you know the ecology and the behavior of birds, the phenology when they arrive in the spring, and you go to the appropriate habitats and you search for them, and hopefully you find them based on your knowledge of natural history and bird life, instead of relying on data and spending time on the computer. So it's a good reminder of the value of not getting completely sucked into finding information, but learning about nature, birds, natural history to really inform how you go out and see birds and look for birds. And in a lot of ways, it's much more satisfying.
And how does that how do you guys build off that, Holly and Wenfei, with this trip?
Yeah, I
Holly,
was gonna say we use a lot of eBird hotspots to kind of figure out, where are people really seeing birds. But Xavier kind of took it a step further and was like, okay, here's all these birds. What was seen last year around these same dates? We kind of helped us hone down like what were the most likely species at each location. Like Gerrit said, looking at sort of the ecology, if we're going to be in a location where we can see both the Kachemak Bay and the Beluga Slough, which is a bit more of like a mudflat kind of area, you know, what are the different species we might see in those different areas, with different tidal periods, that kind of thing. So thinking pretty much the same thing about, as Gerrit was saying, like we're thinking about all of these different things. And then on the whole community aspect of it, right? We're talking to people that are locally there. What have they been seeing this year? What has the experience been this year and, currently? And we're kind of, on the fly adjusting our plans.
yeah, and I would also say there's nothing like a good old-fashioned field guide. If you don't know the
Yes.
birds of the area at all, I like to just go to a bunch of field guides and look through them to see which places I'd like to go birding next, really. It's what I
It's a
always used to do, and it's a fun way to spend one's time. I would also say, depending on where one wanted to go, there's nothing like knowing your own backyard really well. So going to the same place regularly, that's how you get a sense of where to find the birds and when and sort of what kind of habitat. You get a sense of where the birds like to be.
I think that's a really good point, Wenfei, and one that I think of, I would add to that, that knowing the birds that are there really,
Mhm.
really well helps you filter them out when you're looking for the stuff that might be a little bit tougher to find. Knowing that that goldfinch is going to make 15 different vocalizations helps you kind of like filter that out when you're looking for the little new warbler that showed up.
And
Um,
then also just the birding reciprocity. I find that every time I go birding, there's always someone else with their binoculars at some point that I'm going to bump into and telling each other what you've seen or exchanging the news. That's very much how I end up finding recommendations for where to go next or and doing my bit to clue someone in if they're new to the area.
those are all great points, and it sounds like they all kind of played a role in the success that you guys had on Big Day. So thank you so much for sharing those. And I think that it's great for people to be reminded that their backyard or their local park is a great place to start. It starts with that first step. Um, so conversely, another question that came in that really speaks to the core of what Gerrit's film and talk today was about had to do with the threats to not only the Colville River area, but to this entire region, to the birds of that region, to biodiversity, and along with that, some sense of, well, what can they do? What can we do about this? And so, Gerrit, I don't know if you might have a couple minutes of what you see these
Yeah.
threats and what people can do.
Yeah, so obviously the threats in America's Arctic, most people know are related to development, specifically energy development. And as luck or not luck would have it, even last night, the budget reconciliation bill that was passed in the House of Representatives mandates uh, leasing in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. They did have some language in there mandating additional lease sales across the National Petroleum Reserve. Um, but if these areas are critical to bird life, and if that's important to you, um, obviously contacting your representatives with opposition to drilling in these areas is the most important thing everybody can do, really, and extremely timely, like today. So um, that's really the big piece of this.
I appreciate that. And it is a really timely message. And it makes even, we planned this quite a while ago. And the fact that all these things are converging right now is just another, an instance of being well informed and caring about knowing what you care about and making sure you communicate to the people that have some say over these things that you care about is a really important part of conserving them. Um, it looks like we're right at the top of the hour right now. And really what an hour it's been from highs and even higher heights. I feel like I've been inspired today, from one end of Alaska to the other. So thank you all for taking us on this trip. Thank you all out there in the audience for joining us on this trip. Um, a reminder to everyone out there to please feel free to share this Colville River documentary with your friends, family, and communities. You can actually be that glue that helps connect people with these beautiful places and birds, the same way that Gerrit and Holly and Wenfei and Team Sapsucker have sort of taken us all there together. And along with that, you can share your thoughts with the officials that make those decisions about these birds and these beautiful places that are vulnerable to development and need protection. There's also still time to donate to this big day effort if you wanted to support the lab's urgent work to help protect birds. And as I've said before, if you've registered for this live event, we will be reaching out to you in the next day or so with a link to the recording and some materials related to this event. So Holly, Wenfei, Gerrit, thank you so much.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
if you can give a big wave to everybody out there in the audience,